CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Now, across the continent, Africans celebrated earlier this week as they welcomed in the new year. 2016 saw a mixed bag for Africa's political and economic outcomes. And so 2017 is expected to be a make or break year for the continent's socio-economic outlook. Over the next 12 months, a large wave of elections are due, security will be a top priority, and experts are predicting at least a slight economic recovery. So, following a year that's delivered major surprises both in Africa and globally, what does 2017 hold for the African continent? I'm Beatrice Marshall on CGTN. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, across Africa, people are looking ahead to the coming year with both optimism and expectation. CGTN spoke to Africans about their hopes for 2017.
I think 2017 will be a good year for me. Looking at the current situations and the current dynamics and the direction in which these things are taking place. For example, we're talking about the ease of doing business. It means our government is doing something on the issue of creating a conducive business environment or an enabling business environment.
For Nigeria in particular, we voted for a change and we're expecting that better change to start manifesting. We believe that the Buhari government is working hard, and by God's grace 2017 we expect to see manifestation. For West Africa, we expect to see development and growth.
Now what we need to do now, we need to start investing in growth sector, most especially in our youth. And the best way to do that is through entrepreneurs. We need to start investing in sectors that can bring money. Because the reason why in the session today is the one-stop factor. Those businesses that make money are already dying. So we need to start creating new ways. We're in the 21st century and businesses have been involved right now. And one thing again, we must change in Nigeria. We must change that survival of the fittest mentality we have in this country.
My name is Ramadan Abdel Bari. I work in the Ministry of Education. I wish a better year for my family and friends. For Egypt, I wish that it becomes more and more stable next year. As for Africa, I wish it would be more productive and becomes the breadbasket of the world. I also wish it becomes more developed.
My name is Mohammed Rashwan. I own a small private shop. My personal wish is to be healthy and safe in 2017. I wish for Egypt to be a much better country next year. As for Africa, I wish it becomes strong and united.
I expect to buy land. I expect to get to know God more. I want to be more of God. Resolutions for Africa as a whole. I expect there to be voluntary surrendering of power, as in peaceful transition. Then I expect there to be stable security. I would want Africa to be united.
And now to offer up their predictions for Africa in 2017, I have expert guests standing by in Lagos. African Affairs Analyst ACHIKE Chude in Beijing. Professor Ho Wenping, she's a Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with me in Nairobi, Consultant Economist David Awiro. Thank you all for joining us in this discussion. ACHIKE Chude, I'll start off with you. Before we look at specifics though, I want to get your assessment and thoughts on the trends that you feel will shape Africa in 2017 very briefly.
Yeah, well, the challenges would always remain. I mean, they've been there for quite some time, in as much as the society is increasingly, becoming aware of its duties and its responsibilities. Of course, in a country, in an economy that is really desirous of, moving forward, you would expect that under normal circumstances, it is the economic dynamics in Africa that should determine exactly the direction of the continent. But unfortunately, in most cases, it tends to, be the political dynamics that tends to influence what happens at other levels. Of course, we are all aware of some of the major events that will take place in the African continent, elections in key countries of Africa, Kenya. Then we have the situation in Congo with Joseph Kabila, and then some other parts, of course, again, the issue of terrorism is not something that has gone away, overnight. It is still going to remain with us, with governments trying their very best to stem the tide of terrorism. So these are some of the issues, I think, that briefly, that would dominate the political space in the African continent.
Professor Ho Ping, your perspective?
Well, looking ahead of the 2017, I think the more challenges than the opportunities the African will face. You see, economically speaking, I think all the international economic environment is not getting better for Africans' economic growth rather than getting worse because the whole economic growth globally now is still declining. And also that will make those resources-rich countries in Africa, they are short of those foreign exchange reserve, those revenue is still coming down. And also African, continentally speaking, the integration, economic integration is not moving forward as fast as people expected. There are many hurdles still ahead, like those infrastructure, even though it's getting better, but yeah, it's quite slow. And also, politically speaking, there are many big countries that are facing these elections in 2017. So we are not so sure all those elections will be taken place in a very smooth way. So we will keep a close watch to that.
Right, David Owira, your take.
Yeah, for me, I'm a bit more optimistic that the trends that we are likely to see in Africa is, in spite of the depressed commodity prices and the pressures from the fiscal in terms of interest rates as well as balance of payment pressures, there is a strong interest in Africa from from everyone. We see sort of strengthening of interest from emerging markets such as China and India, and we see sort of resurgence in terms of prioritization of Africans on the need to have greater integration and a focus on the core infrastructure development that the continent requires. And so, in spite of the shocks that might come out of the political reforms that are taking place and the elections that are due to be held in a number of countries, there's indeed some positiveness that might come out of 2017.
So it does sound, though, that there is going to be a mixed bag for Africa in 2017. And now, from a political perspective, 2017 is shaping up to be an interesting year for Africa. As many as 20 countries will enter into both national and local elections in the next 12 months, with much of the continent's current leadership set for a shake-up. In Angola, President Jose Eduardo dos Santos announced in December that he will step down, making way for a fresh round of elections and a fresh leader in August. Kenyans go to elections in the same month when President Kenyatta will vie for a second term in office. In Rwanda, President Paul Kagame will be seeking another 7-year term following the 2015 constitutional amendment that allowed him to stand for at least an additional 3 terms in office. And after 10 years in office, Africa's first female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, will also be stepping down as Liberia's leader in October, when more than 1.9 million registered voters will elect presidential and legislative candidates from 22 political parties. Right, ACHIKE Chude, to you. Again, you have mentioned that elections will be dominating the African continent, but we did see ECOWAS intervening in the situation in the Gambia, still intervening in the situation in the Gambia. Is this what we are likely to see from regional bodies and from the African Union as well in the event that these political elections do not go as expected?
Yeah, well, we have come a long way in Africa. I mean, talking about the African Union and the previous stance of that body and that of ECOWAS in the non-interference or in the political actions of other African countries. We've definitely gone beyond that, because when you now talk about issues that are fundamental to the rights of man, you realize that, you cannot have closed borders anymore. The world has become a global village, and so everybody's interested in what happens, especially when it comes to certain fundamental principles of governance and politics. And so we have like I've said, a lot of political activities, elections coming up all over the continent. But I just want to emphasize the fact that there is a wind of change that has been blowing in the African continent for quite some time. And when it comes to the democratic exercise, it is no longer as it used to be before. Now you have a new kind of thinking even among African political elites, especially on the part of the people. They are making a greater, demand on their political leadership, and expect much more, come election time. And so this is what we see, what we saw play out again in the Gambia. And then again, like you said, the intervention of the regional body, the ECOWAS. It is clear that we have gone beyond, the period when certain people, certain political leaders felt that they could ride roughshod over the people. There are certain basic international standards when it comes to political, participation, during elections.
Regional bodies are beginning to take center stage here in that window of change that ACHIKE Chude has mentioned. Professor Howen Ping, though, the African Union Commission is going to be having its elections later this month. How significant an event is that likely to be in shaping Africa going forward?
Well, we will see a change of the leadership of the AU. But I think this is a normal thing and a routine thing. Actually, this thing should be done even as early as 6 months ago. But at that time, it hasn't been coming as a result. So anyhow, if there's a smooth transition from AU, the chair lady, Madame Juma, to another one, which means even the process, I think, is very interesting. You see the 5 candidates, they all show up face to the public and put forward their idea how to strengthen the power of the AU, how to push forward the Africans' integration. The process itself, I think, say something, which means now this is a progress, the progress. And for the Africans, those leadership choosing, this is a kind of a continental democracy. It's similar like the UN, the Secretary General's choosing process now, which is good. But anyhow, the leadership change itself cannot guarantee. Now, AU wants to change the leadership, and then they're certainly moving to a very good chapter. That's not guarantee for that. But it needs a collective, effort coming from all the member countries.
Right. David, though, ACHIKE Chude had mentioned that the political goings-on in Africa might override the economic. How do you view, though, the political and the security situation in Africa going into 2017 vis-a-vis the economic growth of the continent?
I think it's very critical. As has often been said, separating the politics from the economics is very difficult. And whenever we have transition processes, the economic stability of the country sometimes goes into question, especially in circumstances where the transition is not smooth or it's contested or the election process itself is not transparent and credible. And so it will be, very important for not only those countries but also the AU as a continental body to, advocate for credible electoral processes so that the momentum that is there within Africa is not lost.
And we're going to be watching very closely those 20 elections that will be taking place across the continent in 2017. For now, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll continue our discussion on Africa's 2017 outlook. To stay with us. Africa is not one story. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Economic slowdown due to falling commodity prices, particularly oil, and slow global economic growth adversely affected most African economies in the course of 2016. But many believe economic prospects for the continent in 2017 will be better The IMF expects a slight recovery in GDP growth for the coming 12 months, and ratings agency Moody's places that same growth at 3.5%. David, I want to get your perspective here as an economist, though. What do you see as the biggest economic risk for Africa in 2017?
I think the risk still continues to be the, our productions are still dependent on rain. And so we've heard of warnings of La Nina, for instance, in Kenya and so forth. So these might actually depress agricultural production. The second, of course, being that we are commodity-based economies. And so the current depression in the commodity prices will continue to affect countries like South Africa and Nigeria and so forth. And so those are very, very big risks standing out there.
Are we seeing Africa's economies, though, rebounding?
Yes, certainly. If you look at what has been happening over the last 5 years, there's been a sort of constant, reinvestments in terms of the core infrastructure that is required to link both not only intra-African countries, economies, but also Africa and its traditional partners. At the same time, we've seen a renewed interest from countries such as India as well as China, fostering or seeking to balance the trade between the two countries. And so there's indeed very positive prospects going forward in terms of the economic outlook.
Professor Ho-Ping, when we look at those prospects from a Chinese perspective, though, there has been a 31% rise in China's foreign direct investment to Africa. Though, what do we expect, though, in 2017 when it comes to the growth in China-Africa trade?
Yes, in 2017, I think Africa can continue to count China's increasing involvement in Africa. Not only the investment and also development assistance and also even the trade volume. I think nowadays China has spent a lot of effort for pushing this like infrastructure building in Africa and also industrialization in Africa. We are seeing China now, we have quite a lot of extra industrial capacity. Now it needs to be transferred to Africa and to integrate it with Africans, those huge potentials in like human resources and those resources also in those market and also those middle classes, this buying capacity now all increasing. So that's why I think the future is quite optimistic. Right now, even Chinese foreign minister is about to visit Africa continent, to visit the 5 countries. So the key issue, the message he would like to send is to strengthen these bilateral relations. And 2017 will be 1 year to carry out those those contracts has already been signed between China and African countries. For example, those big infrastructure projects like a railway, like a port, like a hydro dam. So all of that will pave a very good basis for infrastructure, and then will serve as a very key element for luring those foreign investment, not only China's and also other emerging countries and even developed countries as well.
Right. ACHIKE Chude, though, 2 of Africa's big economies, Nigeria and South Africa, were hard hit in 2016, and Nigeria particularly went into a recession. What is the economic outlook there?
Yes, well, I can tell you something, and that is the fact that a lot of people have been secretly happy, essentially because of the falling prices in oil. And in Nigeria, which has been the mainstay of the Nigerian economy. And of course, the question has always been asked in the past, is oil a curse to this country or a blessing? And I think the question has been answered a very long time ago, that the oil itself has been more of a curse than a blessing. And so people have been secretly happy because it is now forcing the government to look inwards. It's now, even though they have been talking about diversification for the past 3 decades, but we have never had it so bad in terms of the economic outlook in this country and the economic realities. Poverty is something that has been on the increase in this country, and so the government realizes this time around that concrete practical steps need to be taken to diversify the Nigerian economy from its independence on oil, and that they have done. I mean, they have been doing, especially in the areas of agriculture, solid minerals development, and the other aspects of the economy of this country. from that perspective. And so I think that the economic outlook is not exactly bad, but it's going to take time. These things take time because we've had so many years of the wrong kind of planning when it comes to the economy of this country. And but again, one thing I need to say, even not just even beyond South Africa, the reality is that that Africa is said to be the last frontier for major global investment, and we see that the fact that we have so much infrastructural deficit in Africa, the fact that Africa is playing a very minute role in terms of international trade and industrialization is clearly an indication that there is so much money, there is so much that can be done in terms of investing in the African continent in order to lift the continent out of poverty. And I think that this is the challenge. And so once we can get the politics right in Africa, make sure that we have the kind of stable environment that that is conducive for huge investments and so on, there is great potentials that we are going to have much more activity at the economic level in Africa.
Right. One area where there were many positive outcomes was in China-Africa relations in 2016, and 2017 is shaping up to be even better. CGTN spoke to Rudolph Du Plessis, Economic Program Officer at the South African Institute for International Affairs, to update us on expectations for cooperation between the continent and Beijing.
I think at this stage it's quite early to tell what 2017 will bring. On the South African level at least, something that's quite exciting is the opening up of the regional offices for the new development bank, which is the BRICS bank led by Russia, China, India and South Africa, and China of course. And it will be the coordinating office for all investments going forward into Africa. So that's an exciting thing coming up in South Africa. Then in East Africa and Kenya, we'll see the opening up of the standard gauge railway, which is the initial stretch between Mombasa and Nairobi, which is the biggest investment in Kenya's post-colonial history. I think what will really set the scene, will really set the tone at least, is the foreign minister's yearly visit to Africa. So we'll see if any of the promised FOCAC projects, such as the Capacity Development Cooperation Fund, I think it's called, how that will feed into Africa's ambitions to industrialize and to also beneficiate a lot of its agricultural resources. I mean, it's quite important that I think that Africa moves away from the raw resource export trap that it's been stuck in for the past few decades. We really need jobs, we need manufacturing, we need a lot of agro-processing to take place in Africa, and I think China would be quite well suited and well placed to assist Africa in these ambitions.
Well, of course, and the nature of China-Africa ties in 2017 will be taking center stage here on the continent. Professor Hao Weng-Ping, though, what do you think the nature of China-Africa ties will be in 2017, particularly given the fact that there is a perspective of anti-globalization, so to speak, coming out of the West? How will this impact Africa?
Yes, you see, this coming 2017, there is a kind of trend that is called anti-globalization and the new kind of trade protectionism or isolationism. So I think China, as the President Xi Jinping had made that remarks in the APEC meeting in Peru in the year 2016, he said China is the force trying to continue to push forward this global trade free, this liberalization, and also we are fully against the trade protectionism. So in that sense, which means China-African trade, we will continue to push for that. We want to open China's market more for Africans' commodity, and also to improve Africans' technical know-how and to improve this value-added production, producing capacity. That is the very essence for establishing those economic trade special zone. Because with those special economic zones establishment, and then that will becoming a cluster group effect. So many Chinese companies, they can go to that zone to establish those factories and then to improve the technical know-how for the local partners. So that will make this value-added production capability getting improved. So which strengthen, which will strengthen Africa's power for to get into this global trade.
Right, David?
Yeah, I think the outlook is in regards to China-Africa relations. It's very positive because if you see the challenge we have in Africa is a huge number of the unemployed people. And we know that China incomes have been rising. And for a long time, China, most of the jobs globally, in terms of the global value chains, have been located in China. And so as incomes rise, these jobs will be displaced. And the natural place that they might come to, depending on the, of course, subject to the policy context, is Africa, because our income levels are still low, and yet we have such a rich human resource base. And so, you know, in terms of the outlook for 2017, you know, if Africa puts, you know, in place policy setup that would then ensure that these jobs that then become displaced from China end up in Africa, and with the partnership that they already have with China, then the unemployed numbers in Africa could actually benefit from those jobs.
Right, ACHIKE Chude, your final comment.
Yes, well, I think, like we have said, the reality is that we face challenges in 2017. But I think the critical thing is that, especially those, the political elites in most of the countries in Africa realize that the stakes are much higher, and that so there is a heavier, you know, concentration. And I think that is why the African Union also in their agenda 2063 is also trying to blend the sustainable development, you know, goals of the United Nations to see how, you know, they can articulate a more comprehensive policy with regards to Africa in terms of development, in terms of investment, in terms of taking the African people out of poverty. It is critical, because if we want to solve some of the major problems that have been blighting the African continent, issues like you know, instability and terrorism and the rest, you need to also do something about poverty. You need to also industrialize massively and take the teeming youths out from the streets and get them meaningfully, you know, engaged, you know. And then you also need, most importantly again, to ensure that that Africans are properly educated. The level of illiteracy in the continent is such that we cannot move this continent forward, you know. And so all of these things, I think, are in the minds of African political leaders. And but it is important that the civil societies, organizations, ordinary citizens, and so on, you know, continue to exercise greater pressure on the political elites to force them to begin to do those things that are right to move their countries forward and the continent.
Right, ACHIKE Chude, unfortunately we have to leave it there, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Lagos, African Affairs Analyst ACHIKE Chude. In Beijing, Professor Ho Wenping, Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And with me in Nairobi, Consultant Economist David Owiro. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. Goodbye.